WAPO is starting to admit that maybe the COVID virus came from the place it most likely came from. But the one thing they will not stand for is questioning the guy who funded the lab, Dr. Fauci. Today we'll be looking at this article, breaking it down with the 5-sheet, and seeing how it argues, as I paraphrase their thesis, that it is unreasonable, even conspiratorial, to consider whether Fauci had any hand in the origin of COVID-19. So, the little background here, this came on the heels of Rand Paul questioning Fauci during a Senate testimony, because that Wuhan Institute of Virology, there's renewed interest in the lab leak hypothesis. A lot of more credible, or a lot of more mainstream sources, I don't know if credible is the right word, but a lot of more mainstream news sources are coming around to the idea that maybe that place that was doing gain-of-function research on coronaviruses, right where this place first broke out, maybe that's where it came from. So, and also, we've known this whole time that that place was receiving funding by U.S. government agencies overseen by Fauci. Okay, so let's see what they do here. It's a lot of muddying the waters, right? This isn't a clear, it's not like one of their hit piece articles where they just like, we've got this guy by the balls, we're gonna just go out and we're gonna use our strongest rhetorical devices to attack this guy with everything we got. This is one when they're like, no, nothing to see here, folks. So, the manipulative tactics they use here are primarily ones of obfuscation. So let's run through them. They fall into 3 main categories in this article. First one is poison the well. These are, the name manipulation tactics on the 5-sheet, which you can see at the website below. Glossary gives good definitions for all of them. So, poison the well. They had this paragraph early in the piece. I'll read it out. But while some Republicans have criticized the initial dismissal of that theory as evidence of a lack of curiosity from the media and health officials about the origins of the virus, or even some kind of pro-China or anti-Trump bias, the theories about Fauci's complicity take things to another level. So this is, before they lay out much of the factual basis, much of what's going on, they prime their readers with this piece. So they set everything in tones of partisanship, in terms of tribalism, where questions about the lab leak in general are framed as this right-wing thing. And then questioning whether or not Fauci was involved in any way is an extension of that. It's an even crazier right-wing-ish thing. Righter-wing thing. So that's poison the well. That makes it hard for a reader to objectively break down the information being presented, especially if you're one that is a little bit blue-leaning. Then your subconscious is immediately told that any information pointing to the fact that this is a lab leak, or that Fauci did have some level of involvement, that's all coming from the other team. That's all out-group information. Ooh, you can't trust those guys. So go ahead and dismiss that. Alright, that's tactic number 1. Let's look at tactic number 2. They used straw man feigning ignorance, common go-to. Alright, the quote here. But there is no evidence that such funding ran afoul of U.S. law, or that it contributed to the pandemic. Talking about, Fauci funding the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So, that statement there, it says 2 things. First is that the funding of the pandemic, or funding of the Wuhan Institute of Virology did not contribute to the pandemic. And the second is that funding of the Wuhan Institute of Virology did not run afoul of US law. So let's take those one at a time. First, that did not contribute to the pandemic. Well, even these guys, even the Washington Post, who have very much a bias pushing against the narrative that the lab leak is possible, have their little, you can see the biases that I've listed for these guys here. They are not the type of guys who are very willing to admit that that's a plausible theory. But even they've been coming around to the fact, saying like, yeah, that's a serious question now. We, have to really consider whether it did come from this lab. So, if that does turn out to be the case, if it did, the origins of the coronavirus were in that Wuhan Institute of Virology, then the fact that the United States health agencies were funding it, at the behest of Dr. Fauci, that certainly seems to have contributed to it. So when they say, that there is no evidence that the funding contributed to the pandemic, if that premise turns out to be true, that looks like some pretty darn strong evidence. And so that would only be true if there's no evidence that the lab leak is conceivable, but they concede elsewhere in this article that that evidence does exist. So, it's highly misleading, manipulative, in that sense, number one. Second thing it's saying is that it does not know evidence that Fauci's funding of that lab ran afoul of US law. Now, that's misleading, because what Rand Paul accuses him of in the exchange is not of breaking any laws, but of using waivers, of abusing his position of power as the head of the National Institute of Health or epidemiology, whatever his exact title is, of using that title to push through all of these policies that allowed for the US government to fund things that the Congress had written laws to forbid, specifically the gain-of-function research. At some point, the US was okay with funding gain-of-function research, and then they decided that's too dangerous, let's stop doing that. There were laws written to forbid that from happening. But as the head of that institute, Fauci was pushing through certain waivers and allowing that funding to go forward anyway. That's what he was being accused of. Not of breaking the letter of the law, but of breaking the spirit of the law. So, the quote here, highly misleading, highly manipulative. Alright, let's move on. So, then they have a couple of false citations here. False citation is where they have a hyperlink in the article that if you didn't follow it through, it would appear that that link is providing evidence for whatever the point in the text of the article is. But when you do go and follow the link through, it does not support their point. So there were two cases I identified in this article. First one, this was the sentence, this was the quote from the article. The theory, which was once highly speculative, and which was downplayed by top medical experts such as Fauci. And that links to an article downplaying it less than a week ago. So that time frame seems a little weird, acting like that was way in the past, and they cut to him downplaying it like 5 days ago. And then in that same sentence, there's a second link, like the second clause in that sentence is, quote, is suddenly being treated more seriously. And then that links to an article from over a month ago. So, over a month ago, the scientific community is treating this more seriously. But less than a week ago, Fauci is still downplaying it. So the way they presented those links and the way they write that up is highly misleading. They're acting like this was something that everyone was downplaying. And yeah, Fauci was one of the guys, all the scientists were. But now things are kind of turning around. But it's like, no. Everyone, well, not everyone, but sort of the institutional, news-approved scientists were downplaying that possibility for a long time. And then a month or two ago, the cracks started to come through. There was just overwhelming evidence that the possibility for this lab leak existed, especially after that last WHO trip to China, where they were just totally blocked, and China demanded to, write the whole thing themselves, didn't let them look at anything. So, in the wake of that, there was some mainstream outlets that came out and said, well, hold on, we need an actual investigation. We need to know what's going on. But still, even as of 5 days ago, or whenever that article they linked to was, Fauci is still downplaying the likelihood of that. Why? Well, it's certainly no conflict of interest, and it's not like he was the one funding that research. Except he was. Okay, then they had one other false citation. After stating that Fauci denied intentionally funding gain-of-function research, the article provides a link to PolitiFact, highly trustworthy set of fact-checkers, saying that his statement has proven true, or it's been proven true. It's like, oh, nice. Well, it's been proven true by fact-checkers. We can put that one to bed. But you follow that link, it's pretty old. I think it was from February. I'll show it here. A little while back. And the whole basis for their argument as to why what Fauci said was true was that the lab leak hypothesis is crazy. It's impossible. That, did Fauci intentionally fund gain of research function? Whatever, man. This lab leak thing is bananas. That's what they talk about in the PolitiFact article. And that's the exact same point that even Washington Post, in this very article we're talking about, is admitting is dubious at this point. So the entire basis for that fact check, which even, if you read the fact check on its face value, then it doesn't address the point. Because what they're saying... Excuse me there. Getting a little hot. The article says that Fauci denied intentionally funding gain-of-function research, and then this PolitiFact thing says that's true because the lab leak hypothesis is bonkers. So that doesn't really follow. That's a non sequitur. But also, that premise that the PolitiFact thing said is bunk. That's been conceded at this point by the establishment. So, all told, this is primarily an obfuscation piece. Like I was saying earlier, they don't feel like they're standing on firm ground where they're really trying to attack their enemy, trying to really make a clear argument. Even if they are trying to, go on the offensive, they'll use a lot of manipulation tactics, but they'll make it clear and concise, where the reader comes away knowing what the argument is. Here, it's all about muddying the waters. So, in that sense, WAPO is following classic military dogma. If you're going to retreat, you gotta throw up some smoke screens.